All right, welcome everybody. I think we're ready to get started here. My name is Skip Sanzeri. I'll be your host for today. I'm a co-founder and chief operating officer at QSecure. Welcome as we move into financial transactions today, and we'll take a look at the quantum computing effect on those. The title of our webinar is Securing Financial Transactions in a Post-Quantum World. What we mean by that is a time when quantum computers are powerful enough to break encryption. There's debates on when that may happen. Our feeling is it's sooner than later. But nonetheless, you'll get a lot of great information on quantum computing, the threat, and some solutions to the financial systems and financial industry that we'll cover a little bit later. At QSecure, our charge is to bring post-quantum cybersecurity to government, enterprise, and critical infrastructure for U.S. national security. Quantum computers can enable amazing applications. But unfortunately, we feel that bad actors will use this power to disrupt, steal, and cause harm. In that sense, quantum computers cause or could cause an existential threat to our US way of life. So it's vital that we keep our financial infrastructure in place and secure as we move forward. Some statistics, a cyber attack on our financial infrastructure, a successful one, especially a quantum one, could cause trillions in damage. In fact, Arthur Herman of the Hudson Institute did an econometric model with about 13,000 data points and found that one attack on banking that could hit Fedwire could result in up to $2 trillion in damage. That's just for one attack. So it's pretty significant here that this threat is there. Our goal today is to make you aware of the threat and show you some ways that you can take action. Our federal government is not standing still. Some of you may know that in December, this past December, we passed HR 7535, which is the Quantum Cybersecurity Preparedness Act. Now, all federal agencies have to start the process of assessing their cryptography and vulnerabilities to post-quantum or to quantum computers, and they have to start looking at implementing post-quantum cybersecurity. So now it's no longer a choice, it's compliance. We feel that the financial industry and financial systems will need to start taking a very close look at this as well. As those of you in the industry know, the regulations are very high there, so we expect that this will push through to financial services soon. A little bit about today, we'll have questions and answers, and you'll see in your Zoom session down at the bottom, usually there's a Q&A link. You can go ahead and enter questions there. We'll get those answered at the end of the webinar. So if you'll kindly enter during the webinar, anytime you want, we'll take care of those. We'll get them answered by our experts here on the panel at the end. We'll answer as many as we can. And then for those that are not answered, you'll have contact information and we can always chat after. We'll get you with our folks here at QSecure later. If you have questions about this webinar, we are recording it. We'll make it available on our website within a day or two, and you'll be able to share it out and review it with anybody you'd like. So now let's get started. We're going to meet some of our presenters for today. First up is Steve Klebe. Steve is an industry expert and former head of enterprise payments performance at Stripe. We all know about Stripe, great company. He was also former head of business development, Passmark Security. That was acquired by RSA and EMC. And he was former head of PSP partnerships at Google Pay. Steve's also one of our advisors at QSecure. Following Steve is Lisa Hammitt. Now, Lisa is known industry-wide. She was a former VP of Data and Artificial Intelligence at Visa. She also sits on the board of directors for Clear Channel, on the board at Basiq, and also Glassbox. In addition, she's an advisor to the University of California, San Francisco Med Center and the U.S. Department of Defense, and is a member of the executive committee for IEEE's Data Ethics and Privacy. Before all of that, she ran Watson at IBM and held senior positions at Salesforce and HP in AI and data. So you'll get to hear from Lisa today and get all of that great expertise. And then rounding us out will be Rebecca Crothamer. She is QSecure's co-founder and chief product officer. Becca got her degree from Stanford in symbolic systems and was listed Forbes 30 under 30 in 2020 for quantum computing. She's also named one of the top 12 women in the world in quantum computing. and she's also on the Global Futures Council for Quantum Computing at the World Economic Forum. So Becca's going to cover some of the solutions that are out there that'll help you, help all of you understand how we can start working on this threat coming. So let's move ahead to the slides now. We'll give you a little bit of background here. So on today's presentation, we're not going to go into the depths of quantum computing, but I'll tell you a little bit about it. So quantum computers operate differently than our standard computers that we're using right now. Sometimes we call these classical computers, or CMOS as the architecture. But quantum computers have capabilities to operate where they'll handle multivariate problems really well. Now, our standard computer is not that good at handling a lot of variables. It tends to crush these. So if you think of things that require a lot of variables, different applications like chemistry, material science, protein folding and genomics, aerospace design, logistics, optimization. There's a lot of things, and anything in AI, right? Anything in neural networks, where you're having to handle a lot of variables. Quantum computers are really good at that. And the reason is because they use subatomic properties called superposition. Again, we won't go into all of how that works today, but you'll have an idea about, just kind of the strength of these things. They're being built now all over the world. There's a variety of large companies, including IBM, Google, Amazon, even Microsoft. Everybody's playing a role in building these things. And some of nation states and adversarial nation states are building and spending a lot on quantum computing as well. And the threat here is that these computers will break our encryption. So even this Zoom call that we're on right now is being encrypted by standard internet encryption. We call it public key, or in some cases RSA. But this is the problem that is, or shall I say, the math behind that problem is simply factoring. Quantum computers, because of this multivariate capability, can really factor that so that it becomes an existential threat to this encryption. And by the way, the world has standardized on this encryption. We all use it now. So this is pretty significant. And in our estimation, this will be the largest upgrade cycle in computer history. Trillions of dollars will be needed to change out all of our cryptography for quantum computers, which will be here in years, not decades. And the debate is how many years? Could it be a few, or could it be 5 or 8? We don't know. It depends on how the advancements are coming along. But we're going to show you a few things here that might turn your head. But the real reason to look at this now, some people say, well, wait, why don't I wait for 8 years? I don't care. Well, the reason is because data is getting stolen now. Ever heard of any balloons flying over the US recently? Well, those balloons are collecting data. That data is being shipped to servers and it's stored. While it's encrypted, it's still hard to decrypt with the types of computers we have today. But if they're storing it and you're sitting on it waiting for your quantum computer, you'll decrypt that when you have that. That means that data that needs 25 years, 50 years, 75 years of protection could be unraveled in 5, 7 years. And that means that there's a lot of value to that data for whoever has it. That's why this is a real threat. And that's why we're paying attention to it. Next slide, please, Pat. We even spoke about it. So in Time Magazine, we were mentioned, and we spoke about this as a system, quantum system that will be weaponized. So again, for humanity, quantum can do amazing things. But unfortunately, we believe the first thing people are going to do is use it for weaponization, or to steal, disrupt, or cause harm in any way. And unfortunately, that's just where we're headed. So what we have to do is we have to think about solutions. Go ahead, Pat. So one of the things, and this will go a little bit deep, I won't go through all this here, but one of the people say, well, if you understand quantum computing, you understand it has to be a pretty big system to be able to decrypt our RSA, 4,099 qubits, or just about 4,100. However, and that is a big system, and we're nowhere near there. I think IBM will have something around 400 qubits this year or within a year or so. And that's a qubit is a count of how big or powerful those systems can be if they have to be error corrected and coherent. But again, we won't go too deep into that. The point is that there's one method, which is building one big giant system. But there are other methods coming out now that many people are working on to use hybrid combinations, such as classical computers plus quantum, using more efficient algorithms, using entanglement, which I'll talk about in a second, or even using Other ways we call them reverse multiplication. In other words, not just thinking of building one big system, but if you were able to take 10 400 qubit systems and you were able to what we call entangle those, so you could carry that the coherence across all 10. Well, 10 times 400 is 4,000. That means if you can make one good 400 qubit system, you entangle it with another 10 or 11. That means you could have enough power to crack RSA. That means you could crack our encryption, which means that you get that data really early. So my point here is that this could happen sooner than people think. It's not all about one big system. And that's, I wanted to make that point because we're pretty deep in this. We've been at it for about 3 years, surrounded by a lot of great experts. Our feeling is that the humans are very clever. They're going to figure out how to optimize this and get there sooner. Next slide, please, Pat. So again, we covered this a little bit, but this upgrade cycle, so you think of all communications, anything that goes over the internet has to upgrade, and 20 billion devices. So again, those of you that were around for Y2K, you saw what that was. This is way bigger. This is a much larger problem because we have to take all of our communications in all of our systems, including IoT, edge devices, servers, satellites. We have to start the upgrade process with those. It's going to take a decade to upgrade. So even if we started right now, it's almost a little bit too late. And I think when you're thinking about financial systems, those of you that are running those systems, running those transactions, you're thinking about the cryptography you use, the communications you use across that. We're all in the same boat together. We got to fix this. Next slide, please. So the question of when. So again, if we think about it, that you see there a picture of a chandelier. That's a typical quantum computer, but there's different ways as well. That one is an electron-based quantum computer, but the other ones can use other subatomic properties such as ions and photons. There's even quantum computers that aren't subatomic because they use atoms, neutral atoms. But point is, there's 3, 4, 5 ways of computing with these things, which are making rapid progress in addition to the things I showed you earlier, like entangling. We just think this is really going to speed up now. Now there's more investment. I even noticed last week, there's probably another 100 million that went into quantum computing just last week. And I know from Biden's administration, they're appropriating a lot of money towards quantum computing. But point is that this is going to happen fast because of all of the different systems and the different efficiencies that we're working on. And why is that? Because the prize is huge. The prize is no less than global domination at somebody's fingertips. Whoever gets these systems online first has the power to decrypt everything they've stored, break into any communications that aren't encrypted, get into control systems like ICS and SCADA systems that are out there, hack into any server, get into about anything, any energy grids, you name it. Quantum computers will be able to get there, and so we just hope we can prepare ourselves soon enough. Next slide, please. So just a high level on financial systems before we switch over. So if you think about how much these transactions, right? You think of how many hops and how many open systems there are for these. You've got things moving from servers out to, in this case, with a bank, out to branches, out to customers who could be at their home or on their edge devices. A bank can have, millions of users and, as many edge devices that they have to think about. Are those edge devices secure? Is somebody stealing their password? Somebody stealing access? Somebody doing attacks of some sort? There are vulnerabilities across the entire financial infrastructure. Another thing the Hudson Institute did, they looked at an attack on cryptocurrency, and they found out that would cause a major recession, a 3-year recession in the US, and it would cause a 90% drop in cryptocurrency. Of course, it seems like it's already dropped 90%, but it may have another 90% to go. Anyway, point being, Willie Sutton said it best when he said, "Why do you rob banks?" He said, "Because that's where the money is." So financial is a big deal. One of the most important things is not even just if somebody can access those systems and mess with them, but it could destroy trust. That is one of the key things we need to think about is the trust we have in our financial systems. that needs to be maintained. And anytime we have one of these breaches and data is exfiltrated or something disappears or is disrupted, trust dissipates. So anyway, let me hand over now. I'm going to hand over to Steve Klebe, the industry expert. And Steve, would you take it from here, please?
Sure. Thanks, Skip. It's a pleasure to be here this morning, this afternoon, wherever you're dialing in from. I'll share a quote as well to follow up on Skip's quote, and that is, those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it, which I'm sure is a quote that you're all familiar with. So I'm going to talk today about, what are some of the risks of waiting, to act ahead of this challenge, and share a sort of a anecdotal story with you all. Next slide, please. So you probably all recall the stories about the various breaches that have occurred, over the last, decade, especially. And I was deep in the payments industry during the time that both of these particular breaches that I've highlighted here, happened. In the case of Target, it was a vendor got access to a backdoor system that was something that should have easily been, prevented. In the case of TJX, this was, profoundly, ridiculous. It should have never happened. When I first got involved in payment transactions, all of them traveled across, hard, lines, either true data lines or, dial-up phone lines, which inherently are secure. But what started to happen and what caused the TJX breach was that the shift to Wi-Fi had occurred, and the TJX deployed, they updated their cash registers to communicate over Wi-Fi rather than, the traditional, hard phone line. But of course, they never bothered to change the default passwords that came with their routers. And someone had inside knowledge of the fact that they hadn't, done that, and literally sat in the parking lot of multiple TJXs, with a very, very mundane setup, were able to literally sit there for, an entire day, multiple days, and sniff those lines and grab the clear, credit card numbers that were traveling across that, Wi-Fi connection that they were able to just easily access. Again, another thing that should have never happened. The most basic, preventative measures, would have solved that, problem. Next slide, please. So I'm going to share a little story with you today about my experience at a company called Passmark Security. Some of you may recall the approach to preventing phishing. We called it Passmark Security. Bank of America called it SiteKey. Phishing was rampant 10, 15 years ago. Consumer confidence in online banking was threatened mightily. We were out there beating the pavement, pitching this solution that involved a slight change to the consumer login, where the consumer would pick a picture that they would recall they had picked when they went to log in, which would give them assurance that they were actually at the bank's site, not at a phishing site. It did involve the consumer had to go through an enrollment step. And a quick side note I'd like to mention, and Rebecca can maybe reinforce this later, the QSecure solution does not require any change to end user behavior, which is critical. But back to my story, most financial institutions were paralyzed by what was going on, with phishing problem. It was a legitimate, major problem costing, institutions lots of money in terms of customer support and, having to reimburse consumers who had been compromised, et cetera. We happened to have a champion at Bank of America, but she was dealing with a lot of internal resistance. And I'm sure many of you who are on the call today who are security, people responsible for security at your companies, that you're constantly having to battle, the internal challenges of convincing management to make an investment, in security ahead of regulation, et cetera. Now, what happened was she was championing this internally, and a bunch of time had passed. And then all of a sudden, it became apparent that there were new regs that were imminent coming from an organization that many of you may be aware of called the FFIEC, which is the overarching organization that sits above the individual banking regulators. So that became a call to action for our champion at Bank of America. She seized on that awareness, and B of A jumped ahead and deployed SiteKey to 20 million of their online banking customers. The good news was they were able to do it ahead of the compliance deadline. They garnered a great deal of very positive press. Shortly after they deployed, the FFIEC guidelines were published. Everyone else in the industry had to scramble, which of course disrupted roadmaps that were firmly in place for that period of time, et cetera. Over the course of the next 18 months, the solution was deployed to over 100 million online banking customers across many industry participants. And then subsequently, RSA acquired Passmark, and as they say, the rest is history. Now, of course, once the shift to mobile happened, that particular solution, sort of saw its day in the sun, and the industry moved on. But it performed, as it was, supposed to during that, that period of time. So again, it's just important to keep all that in mind. And back to, the quote, those that fail to learn from history are doomed to repeat it. So let's work together to not repeat, that, from happening. So we've covered that story, what went on with TJ Maxx and Target, and then, having a marketing degree, you're taught in marketing that, as long as they spell your name right, theoretically, it should be positive for you, like when there's news about your company. Well, I can pretty confidently tell you that as it relates to things like data breaches, that's usually not really the case. So this is an area that you definitely want to, get out ahead of. So I'm just going to pause there and turn it back or turn it over to Lisa, who's going to take it from here. Next slide, please.
Thank you so much, Steve. I am thrilled to be with all of you today, and especially thrilled to be part of this journey I think we're all taking on how to make our networks far more secure. And that runs the gamut in terms of our encryption, the infrastructure investment we make, and how we increase security around the endpoints in financial services systems and payment systems. I think Steve did an excellent job outlining much of what we tackle from a risk and a fraud perspective at the consumer level and the merchant level. So we know that authorization and authentication are key points where we can look for risks in terms of bad actors doing what they always do, which is to try to get access to the keys. And they will do that whether it's a conventional system or if it's a more advanced system. And by more advanced, I mean that it can take additional currencies into account, like digital currencies and, you know, points and airline systems and any number of ways that we pay. And so if you contemplate all of the ways that we have to be ahead of the bad guys, meaning 10 years ahead, really, if we're in the payment systems like Steve is, or if you're in the banking systems like Skip was alluding to, then it really becomes clear where we're going to need to augment the traditional ways in which we monitor threats today. So in the post-quantum world, what we can't go into is looking at authorization and authentication, and then finally settlement by using the standard systems that we've been using, which are largely inferencing technologies that we run the rules well after, you know, we've gone through an authentication process. We've got to get out ahead of that, get upstream, which is what Steve is talking about. And I would like to focus on kind of the back end part of that, which is the settlement piece, and why that represents specific risks, and why we're going to have to think about, from a post-quantum world, why we will need a new class of network, really, that enables new types of encryption to combat those threats. So in a word, really, what you're thinking about is settlement delays themselves for the banks always represent exposure to credit and liquidity in some fashion or another. And so what you've probably all read about is Basel III and its impact on banking. And so just to kind of remind you about that a little bit, you're creating sets of regulation so that the banks have access to hard assets to cover some of these risks. Now, whether it's digital currencies or not, most of those hard assets are in precious metals, right? And we vault gold and silver to hedge against any sort of calls that we might have or bad transactions that we might have. Well, the implications to holding those physical assets in a place where we can't use them is that the banks lose money, right? Because the way banks make money is to have assets under management fully leveraged as much as you can, because you're making investments, you know, you're increasing those assets in many ways. And so the longer a transaction is held up, one way of thinking of that, and is not settled, the more money you're losing. So there's kind of a correlation there, right, for the banks on the settlement side. And so what this means is that we need to be able to monitor the kinds of risk that might happen, right, of why we would decline and what would the reasons for that decline be. And so truthfully, the way that we have the encryption going back and forth between parties as we're determining that will have a great bearing on whether we can augment the fraud and risk models that are already out there. So as I mentioned earlier, many of them are based on inferencing technology. I think the banks have spent a lot of money to augment those models with machine learning models. Now, the problem with the machine learning model in particular is that up till now, you've not really been able to run those machine learning algorithms against encrypted data. You have to de-encrypt the data in order to run those. And so if there's PII information, personally identifiable information, within those transactions, you can only imagine the exposure that you're giving to a phishing campaign or malware or something to get access to the keys. And that's what you don't want to have happen. So what we want to do instead is to keep the data encrypted as much as we possibly can. And we want to be able to run sophisticated machine learning algorithms that catch for activity upstream, not downstream as much, and that we are contemplating as many threats as we possibly can in situ, as we are thinking of the authorization and the settlement piece of the equation. And so until QSecure, we've been fairly limited in terms of our encryption in what we've been able to do with some of those models, the risk models. And so now we know from guidance from NIST that we're going to have to augment the type of encryption we're using. So we've been using type 1 encryption across our banking systems. It's available commercially, but we know that in the post-quantum world, we're going to need to have increased ways to look at that data and possibly run the AI models over that encrypted data. And so it's that sort of capability that is ushering companies like QSecure forward. And QSecure is really getting into a discussion about encryption, which is exactly where we need to be, particularly when we're talking about the settlement piece, because that's creating an opportunity to run these advanced forms of artificial intelligence. And if we do it right, and we use systems like QSecure, we can do this in a continuous fashion, right? The ideal would be we're doing it 24/7. We're always looking, right? And we're really modeling threats that we've not yet contemplated, if you will, right? And that's kind of the great part about quantum technologies, because you can model out end probabilities in looking at those risks. So it's no surprise as I talk about this kind of motion that, you know, the Boston Consulting Group would say that of the opportunities that will be created by quantum cryptography, we're looking at 80 billion in value for the banks for acquiring a new class of infrastructure within the space of 2 years. So QSecure is focusing absolutely on the right problem, and it's the nearest term solution to some of the promise that we're hearing that Skip was talking about around the quantum computing spectrum. So we would believe then with that advanced encryption that we get 2 benefits. Number one, we're able, actually 3, if I'm really thinking it through, because number one, everything that Steve was mentioning, we bolster it significantly by being able to handle much more finer grained encryption where it matters. The second thing, as I mentioned, is we get to run our AI models and we get to do so in a maximum security fashion. And then the third is kind of a hidden benefit that a lot of folks are not talking about right now. With that NIST set of guidelines and framework, we're also hearing that many of the banks are contemplating marrying together some of this more traditional way you look at fraud and risk around settlements with cybersecurity. And as you know, cybersecurity involves many different kinds of machine learning that are looking at, fraud that could occur in non-traditional settings, like a gaming situation, and something we might call friendly fraud, where a kid steals his mom's credit card and is using it to buy skins and shields and all of that in a game. That's a kind of fraud, but you can catch it more readily, versus cybersecurity threats, where we really do know that an actor is able to target us during 0 days and perform some of the activity that is being talked about by Skip, around how are we able to go down to the binary code and understand where we're most at risk when we're doing an upgrade or the like. So with QSecure, we have an ability to model out those new networks. And I believe for banking, we will see that traction in the very near term, because it won't only be driven on our need to bolster our systems, as I was saying, but also that new currencies will be introduced. And with those new currencies, I think we're going to have to be thinking about, a much longer value chain. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Rebecca to talk a little bit more in detail about the technology. And I would also encourage all of you to get your questions asked. Even if we get them in the feed, we will find a way to moderate and we will get them answered to you. So thank you. On to you, Rebecca.
Thanks so much, Lisa. This is the quantum space can be really mysterious and complicated. But what the solution to this threat really needs to be is simple. And that's really how we've approached this, right? the threat may be complex. Quantum computing may sound like it's from a Marvel movie or from sci-fi, right? But really, our job is to demystify how to move forward in this new era. And so the previous speakers illustrated the urgency of getting ahead of this threat. And I'll talk to you today about kind of how to really simplify in everyone's minds what the solution needs to look like. Next slide, Pat. So when we set out, we understood that this is a necessary upgrade, whether you do it today, whether you are a bank or other financial services in the financial service industry, and you need to protect that PII, that data that's going to be valuable 1 to 5 years from now, or you're in government or otherwise, whether you need to do this now or you do it several years down the line, this is a necessary upgrade that everyone's going to need to make. And so what the solution needs to look like is something that integrates seamlessly with what you have today, that it's strong, it's safe, it's established. So all standards-based, right, especially when we're talking about the financial sector and other highly regulated industries, you can't use things that are proprietary, that are clever solutions, that are one-offs, because you need to be able to offer industry standards, things that live up to NIST or can meet compliance requirements for you and your customer. Again, these need to be able to integrate with today's infrastructure, today's cybersecurity infrastructure, and not be a rip and replace solution. There's so much on cybersecurity leaders' minds today. And we need to make this solution something that doesn't create more headaches, but takes them away, right? We need attack detection and active defense. This is a new era where threats are evolving rapidly, and we need to be able to identify and defend against these. And finally, this is the bigger picture of where we're going as an industry, right? This is a new era in cybersecurity. And this is the idea that we need a control plane. We need policy-driven crypto agility. You as a cybersecurity leader need to be able to actually look into what's at play in your network, what cryptography looks like, what's being used where, and you need to have control over it. So it's this beautiful thing that we really don't have right now in the industry. And that's what we've really committed to bringing into the industry. And that's that insight, that's having access to this control plane to really look at what's going on in your network, understand the data, understand the behaviors, and actually get control over your cryptography. Next, Pat. And beyond post-quantum cryptography, right? This is a quantum problem that we're talking about, but post-quantum cryptography, or the quantum safe cryptography that we're moving towards in a post RSA world, that's not the end in itself. And so when we talk about this control plane, what you're getting in a new solution, that's post-quantum cryptography, but that's really there's a few different things underlying this that you need to have control over. One is entropy, and this is the idea that typically for cryptographic keys, we use pseudo-random numbers, and those in themselves are at risk. Whenever there's a pattern, whenever they're generated programmatically, there's a possibility to look at those and reverse engineer those, right? So we need to bring true entropy, true random numbers to cryptography. Second is one key versus multi-key, and third is crypto agility. We'll dive in a little bit in the next slides, Pat. So again, entropy is this idea that we're using better locks, we're building better locks, or we're building better keys actually. And so this is the idea that again, you can't just make your keys longer, they need to make them better, right? And so that's what gives us this really modern reinforcement. Next. Now, when we talk about keys, another added layer that we need is multiple keys, right? So if you get hold of one key, typically today, you get hold of that one key, you've got the key to the kingdom. But we're ushering in this new era, again, of configurable, via that control plane, number of keys that you use to protect your data. So that paradigm of one key, one crypto is now dead, and you can have as many keys as you want. Next. And then finally, the idea of one algorithm is dead, right? RSA 2048, again, we're building into this solution the idea of true crypto agility. And that is, there will always be new threats that are coming in. There will always be something new that we have to look out for. And while today you can't really swap out your algorithms on the fly, right? But in this new paradigm shift, you can. So we support all of the NIST standards and finalists for post-quantum cryptography. And you, by policy, you can actually configure what you want to use where. So not just in the case that another algorithm falls in the future, but also in the case that one is more optimal, more efficient in a certain condition. And you can actually set that by policy, and you can swap these out without actually bringing down your production systems, without causing any impact to your customers. And that's really exciting. Next. And this is how we, as QSecure, have addressed this problem. And this problem really is, as the speakers before said, it's a data in transit problem. So whether it's blockchain, whether it's internet, any kind of network, if your data is traveling between points, that's what's at risk. And so the solution needs to address all data in transit. It cannot be a post-quantum VPN, right? It can't be post-quantum chat. It can't be these one-offs. You need to think about this in a way that protects your entire domain of data. And so how we do that is we have QProtect, the platform, and we have Quark, and this is kind of the brains of the operation. This is where everything feeds up to. This is policy. This is the brains that enables key distribution and post-quantum protocols that protect your entire data in transit lifecycle. So on the left side, we have Q Everywhere. And this is especially interesting for those in the financial sector, right? I do all of my banking as a customer from my phone or from my laptop, right? And this is the solution that enables that entire session, right? Anytime I, as a customer, am looking at sensitive data, receiving or sharing, those sessions need to be protected, because again, that data is valuable now, and it's going to be valuable in the foreseeable future. And so the Q Everywhere is the side that protects applications, and without any change in experience or without requiring me to download anything, a company can deploy those protections to an application like online banking, like protecting crypto wallets, like protecting any kind of financial transaction that happens through Q Everywhere. And then on the right side, we have Q Network, and this is how we get in between. Right? This is the application and server-to-server protections that create, Pat, if you go to the next slide, they create this end-to-end vision of how you protect all of your data in transit. So this slide, apologies for the eye chart, but it's kind of your abstracted network, right? So you imagine that you're a bank. You have your on-prem data centers. You have your stuff that's sensitive behind your firewall, typically. And then all organizations leverage cloud in some way, right? So in your upper left, you have your cloud and all of the services that are running there. And up to the right, you have your end users, or maybe it's your employees are remote, working from home, outside of your domain of control, right? Your data is going out over the internet and reaching either your employees or customers or IoT devices or whatever it may be. Everything in this image that blue touches, that's how we address this in an end-to-end way. So we are the blue, and all of those different channels, all those communications then become quantum safe. And that is the QSecure solution. So very simple, easy to deploy, easy to get spun up, and really intended to make this shift very beautifully simple. Next. And with that, I'll hand it back to Skip.
Becca, thank you so much. And Steve and Lisa, both, thank you. I hope the audience enjoyed our expert speakers today. We're going to move into some Q&A here in just a moment. Again, we'll have this webinar on our website within a day or so, and feel free to share it around and access it with your other team members. Want to make you aware, we are doing a webinar on March 29. And this one is focused on securing space. Again, if anybody has seen any balloons recently floating around, well, they're broadcasting right up to satellites. And the satellite infrastructure, some of it's been up there a long time, and it's wide open to listen to. So you're going to hear some great things on that. Chances are almost everybody on this webinar is using that infrastructure in one way or the other. So we'll send out some announcements, but please tune into this on March 29th. Okay, let's get into some Q&A. So yes, all the speakers, if you go ahead and turn on camera and sound, let's get into a couple here. So I'd like Steve to jump on this one, and Lisa, you as well. So there was a question about the quantum effect on card tokenization. What's the threat level there, and what kind of thoughts do you have, Steve, and then Lisa?
Sure, it's actually a great question. So tokenization has become, very common and becoming more and more common throughout the payment card space. There was a reaction to PCI where each PSP implemented a proprietary tokenization scheme. And then finally, the networks stepped in and created a network tokenization scheme. And this has been widely deployed. The most common use case was, Apple Pay, Google Pay, et cetera. All of those transactions were using network issued tokens. And the point that I would make to answer the question at a high level at this juncture is that current encryption standards are being used to create and create those tokens with standard, current encryption schemes. And then, of course, the way it works today is when you do a transaction with an Apple Pay or a Google Pay, the transaction, that token gets sent to Visa or MasterCard or Amex or Discover, et cetera. They turn it back into, so they apply the reverse encryption and turn it back into the raw card number before they send it on to the issuing bank. And again, there are no absolutes here. That's the typical process. And so what I would say is that presuming that quantum security or quantum computing comes along and is able to break the traditional encryption processes, the tokenization will be vulnerable, to that as well, unless the tokenization schemes, the encryption schemes that get used, going forward, become quantum secure. So that would be my response to that question.
Thank you, Steve.
And
Lisa?
I was going to add that that's a wonderful explanation. And I was going to add that I really applaud this question. And the reason I do is because I think you're entering into one of the most emotional parts of payments. We don't think about payments as being emotional, but this is emotional because we started down this process of tokenization because we were thinking about replacing the 16-digit PAN, right, in your credit card. And that's one step. But then we moved into biometric data, right, where all of a sudden the tokens were being created based on your thumbprint and some other type of biometric data that you're giving to your phone. And now there, of course, is a school of thought all around, your face, and authenticating through your face is a token for payment. So we're getting deeper, we're falling down the rabbit hole where our very personal information and the data about ourselves, which is so incredibly valuable, is going to be used for how we purchase goods and services. And so it is highly applicable to this topic of post-quantum cryptography, because I think since we're going down that path, it necessitates that the cryptography be able to take into account more stringent measures to ensure that this data never falls into the wrong hands, because this kind of data that's so personal is going to be used and abused for other things that you don't want, including another identity and things that can happen even on the dark web. So given that we want to leverage the advanced techniques, which is what Rebecca was saying, I think that where post-quantum cryptography will go will be driven by the requirements of tokenization, in that it's not even enough to block the adversary from a transaction or a party-counterparty arrangement in a payment system. We're going to have to find a way to block the adversary from even knowing there's a conversation going on between those two people. And the technology is just starting in that area, homomorphic encryption. But I think that companies like QSecure will herald it in.
Thank you so much, Lisa and Steve, on that. Becca, this question's for you. Is your solution proprietary, or does it leverage the NIST approved algorithms?
Yeah, great question. We leverage the NIST algorithms, only the standards. We certainly believe that as in highly regulated industries like financial services, you don't want to use anything proprietary, right? So we're not trying to come up with our own algorithms and outsmart NIST or any other trusted body. We're using what is standardized.
Great, thank you, Becca. Lisa, question for you. How much time do we have to upgrade? So I think this is coming from a financial services point of view. How much time is there really to get this process done?
Yesterday. And I say that because we are just going to be confronted with so many different kinds of transactions. And I think we have to be ready to pivot. So I dabbled a little bit. I flirted, if you will, in this call on digital payments, or digital rather currency, but I'm using that term very broadly. I'm not thinking of it just as, Bitcoin and some of these other types of cryptocurrencies. I'm thinking about your airline points. I'm thinking about loyalty points inside of Safeway being used to stretch your dollars. All of these things will require that our payment systems be upgraded to handle the level of privacy that is required to protect the consumer data, to protect the partner data from the B2B transactions with the banks, and then lastly, to be able to account for a lot of configurations in how we will spread assets around.
Great, thank you, Lisa. Steve, this question's for you. Which type of payment systems and transaction systems would you consider most vulnerable to quantum attacks?
Well, surely, all financial transactions, that occur online or, from either your mobile device or from, your desktop are probably the most vulnerable. Probably a little less so the ones that happen at the physical point of sale or in hardened environments like, ATM transactions, et cetera. For sure, all of the transactions that happen in a B2B context are vulnerable as well. Those are the biggest, transactions. So anywhere where traditional cryptography is being depended on today, which is pretty much the entire, scope of financial transactions today, are vulnerable. The attacks are likely to, be aimed at, areas where the higher transaction values are prominent first, and then, sort of evolve from there.
Great, thank you, Steve. I've got a question here. I'll grab this one. The question is, do the bad actors have the same tools? And Brad, so in answer to your question, I'm not exactly sure if you mean the same tools as something like QSecure provides or the same access to the same quantum hacking tools. So bad actors, the types of actors we're concerned with are nation state actors, largely because to build quantum computing at this level, it's taking hundreds of millions and billions of dollars of investment. So this won't be most likely, a teenager in their house hacking in. This is going to be, something much different because they're going to have to access a quantum computer and then use it for this nefarious. But we have to assume that any nation state that's investing this much in quantum also realizes they're going to need to protect their own systems. So you have an offensive and a defensive component here. Offensive is, are you going to aim quantum computers at cracking RSA and decrypting data that you may have harvested? And defensive, meaning, do you want people to do, to stop people from doing the same? What we see in general, though, is that some nation states like China have taken an approach called quantum key distribution, which is a different approach. It uses entanglement, a lot of hardware. It's mostly theoretical right now, but it does have its promise for down the road. They've invested in that. Our feeling is that with post-quantum cybersecurity, like QSecure provides, it's software. So we can proliferate out to edge devices, to servers, to satellites very quickly. We don't have to install hardware on a lot of edge devices, and we can move much more quickly with software than we could with putting out, say, quantum key distribution hardware and worrying about things like repeaters. So there may be slightly different approaches, but I would say every actor of a nation state size is going to have offensive and defensive techniques there. So let's see, here's another question here I'll read live. I wasn't able to prep for it. Are there vulnerabilities in the current RSA-based approach, regardless of whether that your solution could address today? I'm thinking of higher key entropy, multiple keys, algorithms. Becca, do you want to grab that one?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question. And that's exactly how we've designed this, is to address today's vulnerabilities. So yeah, as the hackers get smarter and smarter, there's always new ways to hack what we have today. And so that's exactly the idea of this control plane, giving you the configurability to actually make what we have today as far as defenses stronger against today's attacks. So yes, the key rotation, the crypto agility, and the entropy, these all address not just vulnerabilities with RSA, but other types of attacks, right? So yes, 150%. It's kind of the core question that we're answering here is protect for today and tomorrow.
Thank you, Becca. One more question, and Pat, can you skip to the next slide, and we'll get some contact information on the screen. Let me see if we have it there. Sorry, I've got something blocking. Yeah, my email's up there. Feel free to send an email in with more questions or thoughts, or if you'd like to discuss this topic further, you can grab my email address right off the screen. Okay, so last question, and then we'll wrap. Becca, what are some steps that we could take to start preparing ourselves for post-quantum cyber?
Give us a call. The first thing that you need to do is you need to understand if you have data that has a shelf life, so you want to protect it for your customers into the next year or beyond, you really need to start thinking about taking the quantum threat seriously. And so what you can do is we can talk to you about looking at what you have in play, your data and cryptography ecosystem, and we've built in a way that you can try us out on any subnet you want. So one key part of our solution is that you can upgrade pieces and they're still interoperable. They can still communicate with non-upgraded pieces. So, Skip likes to say, if you want to protect the lunch menu to try us out, go for it. And then you can go from there. So, we can do this in a couple meetings, matter of days, and get started slow.
Absolutely. Thank you, Becca. Yeah, agreed. Start looking into it, folks. It's something that you start doing your research. We'll help you speed it up if you want. But either way, start looking into it. It's very important. And again, this is something that's going to take a long time to upgrade. So starting today even will be something that will take quite a while. So anyway, I wanted to thank everybody for attending. And I want to thank our guest speakers, Steve Klebe, Lisa Hammitt, Rebecca Crothamer. And thank you all. We'll see you on the next webinar we have coming up in March. Take care. Have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.